So we're going to go ahead and get into our first game for today. So we're going to actually play some trivia here. And what we'd like to do is we've got 5 questions associated with wellness that we're going to ask you to respond to. And these come from a variety of different topics. So in no particular order whatsoever, we're interested to know your thoughts on these questions. So these are all questions that come from different areas of research on social science or cognitive science or well-being research. And what we'd like to do is ask you to kind of take your best guess, and then we'll let you know what the research suggests. So if you're ready, you'll be able to see a question pop up in your chat window in front of you in just a moment here. So the first trivia question that we have is, reading which of the following books will actually help you reduce your personal prejudices? Is it A, The Babysitter's Club, B, The Secret, C, The Hunger Games, or D, The One Thing? So you'll have a chance to respond in the poll here. And so that should pop up for you in just a moment. So again, the same responses that you'll see on the screen will pop up in your polling window as well. All right, and so we've got all of our respondents are in. We'd like to reveal that the correct answer to this trivia question is, in fact, The Hunger Games. So for those of you who picked The Hunger Games, you are correct. It turns out the research shows that this book actually has the ability to develop empathy with the characters and their situations to the extent which it can actually positively impact and reduce our prejudices. So it's a terrific book. There are obviously motion pictures that go along with it. And we're going to just kind of think about what that might mean for you. And especially in education, this could be a book that might be read in your classroom or in your school. So let's go forward to our next trivia question here. This next one asks about about personal traits. So it says, which of the following traits can make people more cooperative toward you? So we're going to share the polling window will pop up for you. Which of the following traits can actually help to make people more cooperative to you? And if for some reason the polling feature is not showing up on your screen, you can feel free to post your response in the chat window if that works as well. So is it A, smelling great, B, having long eyelashes, C, the sound of your voice, or D, dressing formally? So it's a really interesting thing when we think of cooperation. It's an important aspect of education because we both need our students to cooperate with us as well as our colleagues. We need parents. We need the entire community to cooperate together. And so the correct answer here looks like the majority of people may already have thought of this. The sound of your voice is actually the correct answer. And so the sound of your voice can make people more cooperative or more resistant to cooperating with you. Our next polling question is going to go in a slightly different direction. Researchers have found in studying the things going on from the COVID-19 pandemic that there have been some impacts on personality, specific personality traits, for example. And what they have found is that the personalities of which of these age groups has been most altered by the pandemic. So we're going to go ahead and put this polling question out there to you. So is it individuals under 30, those between 30 and 40, individuals between 40 and 50 years old, or individuals over 50? Oh, that's a great point. All of the above seems like it could be an answer here. It is not actually an answer. And so the research on these different age groups has come out to show that one age group in particular has been most altered in terms of their personality. Let's see, we've got a pretty even decision here between a couple of different groups. It turns out that it was actually the youngest of these age groups. It was people under the age of 30. Their personalities were actually altered by the time spent in the pandemic. And this has been shown by research to have some really interesting effects that we're hoping will adjust as time goes on and we come out of this. So if you're working in schools these days, this has a direct impact on the students that you teach. And if you happen to be a newer teacher, maybe fresh out of college, this has an impact on you as well. So although it is the case that there was an impact on everyone, research has found that those who were most susceptible to personality formation had their personalities altered by the conditions of the pandemic. So our next question we want to go and ask about in our poll here, we've got two more trivia questions. This one is interesting. It asks about extroverts. So extroverts tend to use which of the following most? And so we're going to ask you in the poll here to share your response. Which of the following do extroverts tend to use the most? Is it ketchup, hair product, exclamation marks, or emojis? Okay, we've got almost everyone has responded here. There's an even tie between exclamation marks and emojis on this poll. Well, the research has revealed that it is, in fact, not exclamation marks, it is emojis. That extroverts tend to use emojis the most when texting or sending other text-based messages on social media or other platforms. And the connection here is that it helps to express emotion, which is something that extroverts tend to do more in person with their communication. And so emojis have a great way to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and move on to our final trivia question. This one, related to the last one, asks about emojis. So if you consider all the emojis that exist today, the majority of the emojis researchers have found fall into which of the following categories? And so this one is going to ask about the tone that emojis communicate. So do the majority of them fall into a positive tone, a negative tone, a neutral tone, or no tone at all? So survey respondents are kind of torn here between positive and negative. So let's see here. If we close our poll and we come back to find out the answer to our trivia question, this one is in fact positive tone. So the vast majority of emojis out there, and there are thousands of them, have a positive tone. So if you think about the connection with extroverts, you think about the connection with communication, it's so interesting to think that positive tone is actually the predominant tone that the most emojis have. So thanks for participating in our kickoff trivia. We now have a question for you to bring this all together. So in the chat window, we'd love to have you share your thoughts. What do all 5 of these trivia question answers have in common with each other? How do these relate? So we had the Hunger Games, emojis, people under 30, the sound of your voice, and positive tone. What do you think all of these might have to do with one another? So it turns out that all of these, interestingly enough, have a connection to teaching. These all have a connection to teaching. If you think about it, the sound of your voice as a teacher, as an educator, you are doing a lot of talking. Your voice has a connection to your students that they will know your voice even if they heard it out of a crowd. The Hunger Games. Sometimes education can feel like the Hunger Games, and being in teaching can feel like you're in that book, in that series. But it can also be something that you might read with your students or use to help connect that in. Positive tone, we know that that's an important piece for being able to communicate with young people. Emojis, there are all kinds of emotions that we express and experience during teaching, and emojis are a great way to capture that. And finally, if it wasn't obvious enough, teaching definitely involves people under 30 for the most part. So as we close up our trivia time here, we want to get into our kickoff message, and I want to set the tone for the day with a question for you. So the Teacher Wellness Summit, I want to share with you, is all about something that came out of the pandemic. So having been part of the MEMIC Foundation for Education's advisory board in 2020, we were bringing together a group of educators and industry leaders in education who were talking about what could we do to help the educators at that time. And the feedback that we got was that there was a lot of professional development on technology that was happening, but people were really consumed with the situation around them at the time. And so the idea was born to provide an event and some kind of support that would speak to the personal development of individuals. And that's kind of the story of where this summit was born out of. And so it's really a response to a need for personal development on the side of educators when there was a lot going on at that time personally for students to help and families to help. But for educators, it was really focused on professional development with technology and things of that nature. And so we really kind of asked this question: if we're in the middle of this circumstance, what is it that we are focusing on? And how can we focus on things in a way that will help move us through this? And so, of course, in a different time now than there was 3 years ago, that same question is relevant. And so that's the question I want to ask you to begin setting the stage for our keynote speakers today. I want to ask you, what is it that you are looking at in your life? And to help explain this idea, I want to show you a painting. So this is a painting of Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. It's perhaps one of the most well-known paintings of all time. And the Starry Night, if you don't know, was painted in the 19th century by Vincent van Gogh. It was painted in France in June of 1889, and it was an abstract impressionist painting inspired by his view from the insane asylum in South France, in the city of Saint-Rémy. And he spent a full year there trying to get some kind of a reprieve from his own mental illness that he was struggling with. And this is an interesting story to think about as we set the tone for teacher wellness today, because the backstory of this image, albeit a famous painting, is actually one where Vincent van Gogh was struggling in part with his wellness and was seeking something to help make that better. And so that reprieve allowed him to look out the window at the city and see this landscape, and that eventually inspired this painting. So we want to ask you in the chat window to respond to this painting. Whether you've seen it once or 100 times before, I want you to take a moment and consider, what is it that you are seeing in this painting? Could you list some things in the chat window that you notice in the painting? So take a moment to jot down your ideas. What do you notice, or what do you see in this painting? There are no wrong answers here. You can list everything that you see. So we've got the beauty of the starry night, of the night sky, movement, change, movement. The stars in the sky seem so close, they seem so big. I will tell you one thing that I noticed here as I studied this painting: the lights are on in all of the buildings except for the big church. There's a lot of small lines that make up the big picture. It's emotional. The sky is definitely overwhelming the town. The stars are really bright. So all of these things you're noticing. Now, I noticed that a couple of people mentioned that they see some movement here. And I'm curious, if you're seeing movement, do you mean that the painting is actually moving, or that there's an image of movement that's kind of communicated by the way it's drawn? Let's see here. Someone said movement. Would you be willing to unmute and share what you meant by movement? I think Amber said movement. Susan said movement. Would one of you be willing to expand on what it is that you meant there?
I feel like this tree right in the foreground is maybe coming at him. And then the sky, it just looks like it's moving, and I can't tell if it's positive or negative.
Okay.
Seems emotional.
Okay, thank you for that. Amber, was there anything you wanted to add to the movement piece? Not yet, okay. So thank you for that. All right, so then the question I want to ask you next, so you're staring at a still image of a city, and yet we're kind of getting, there might be an impression of movement here, but it all depends on what you're looking at. You mentioned that looking at certain aspects of this communicate movement more than others, but I want to ask you to do something really interesting now. So this question of what is it that you are looking at? So we've been looking at this painting now. I want to ask you to watch a video clip and stare at the following image. It's a different image. I want you to stare at it for 30 seconds and then look again at Van Gogh's painting. All right, here it comes. So did you notice the painting start to actually move? It's really moving after watching that image. So the big idea here that I want to communicate to you is this idea that what you focus on, what you are looking at, affects how you see other things in your life. And because of that, an intention that I want to communicate as you go through and see the speaker's messages from today is to imagine, what is it that you are focusing on? What is it that you are looking at? And how can that positively affect how you see the other things in your life? And so it is with that that I want to be able to pause here and introduce our first speaker today for the Teacher Wellness Summit. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Phil Tenalia. And Phil is a lifelong educator. He has worked at all levels in K-12 as a teacher, a school psychologist, a crisis intervention specialist, and he's been in the industry for 35 years. During his career, he's worked with teachers, he's worked with students in classrooms, he's done consulting, he's done counseling, and he's worked really hard to promote healthy relationships. Phil's also a longtime family therapist and has helped countless individuals and families with life challenges and stressors. And we're so excited to welcome Phil to the Teacher Wellness Summit as our first keynote speaker. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and turn over the screen to Phil so that he can be able to show you some things and give the floor to him. After his talk, we'll get a chance to ask some live Q&A of Phil, and then be able to have a breakout session where we'll talk with our colleagues and participants to be able to discuss how to put Phil's ideas into action. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Phil Tenalia.